Hello, please create a new notes page on the right called Reconstruction Notes and include today's date. Reconstruction Part 1, Screencast. Two big questions to consider while you take these notes. Did the end of the war and the end of slavery lead to a peace based on liberty and justice for all? That means liberty and justice for the formerly enslaved people. Second big question to think about. Did these events bring African Americans closer to enjoying all the ideals? Reconstruction is an important time in American history, and even today in 2019 or whenever it is, we are still experiencing the impact of Reconstruction. Roman numeral 1, political struggles. This shows a freedman or an formerly enslaved African American and a line of them voting. Uppercase A, Reconstruction, and lowercase a, 1863 to 1877, period of time after the Civil War in which Southern states were rebuilt and brought back into the Union. Goals of Reconstruction. The first goal, create new governments in Southern states loyal to the Union. And the second goal was to abolish slavery. But you're going to see that perhaps politicians and leadership wanted to go further. Okay, still under Roman numeral 1, political changes. This is Andrew Johnson, the President of the United States during a portion of Reconstruction, and he took over for Abraham Lincoln after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. B, presidential Reconstruction. So President Johnson's moderate plan. So his plan was moderate. We're going to see that not everybody liked that it was moderate. Confederate states could rejoin the Union once they created new governments, paid off their war debts, and ratified or agreed to the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. And we'll take notes on that amendment a little later too. So this was viewed as a moderate plan and basically was a generous plan to get the southern states back into the Union and get the country going again. But then there was a Congressional Plan, and this was led by radical Republicans. And they opposed Johnson's plan as too generous or too easy for the South. They wanted tougher requirements for readmitting Southern states into the Union. So Congress's aggressive plan. They made the 14th Amendment. That was in 1868, and that granted citizenship to anyone born in the U.S. and guaranteed all citizens, including freedmen or former enslaved African Americans, equal protection of the law. And they had something called the Military Reconstruction Act, and this allowed the Union military to take control of the South, and they divided it into districts. And they created new governments with both black and whites serving in leadership roles. This was very progressive for the time, and you could even say that African Americans had as much say in the shaping of the country, or more say, than they do today. All right, Roman numeral 2, defending freedom. So the Emancipation Proclamation was made during the war in 1863. And an order issued by President Lincoln on January 1st, 1863, and it was declaring enslaved people in the Confederate States as free. And it turned the Civil War into a fight for freedom, not just a fight for getting the Southern states back into the Union, but a fight for freedom. So the 13th Amendment, this was made in 1865, so we're going a little out of order, but the 13th Amendment, 1865, of course, before the 14th Amendment, and this abolished slavery in the United States. And then also created during this time of early Reconstruction was called the Freedmen's Bureau. And this was an 1865 agency created by Congress to help and protect newly freed Black Americans. And this was under President Johnson's rule. And they provided food, medical care, job training, and education for freedmen. Freedmen is what the term that is used for formerly enslaved African Americans. And you've maybe heard the expression 40 acres and a mule. Part of the Freedmen Bureau's assurances was to provide formerly enslaved African Americans with 40 acres plot of land and a mule. Defining freedom, we're still under Roman numeral 2, and now black codes. So in 1865 and 1866, early Reconstruction, laws in the South are made that limit the rights and freedoms of newly freed African Americans. No right to vote or hold office. Limited work opportunities to farms in order to replace enslaved labor. So in other words, African Americans could only work on farms or were heavily encouraged and threatened to just work on farms. Kept blacks at the bottom of the social ladder. And of course, the black codes enforced segregation. So separate spaces in political, or in public, they would separate blacks and whites in public spaces. And then sharecropping is another aspect of the South that worked against African Americans' newly found freedom. And this was freedmen could not afford land, so they rented plots of land as tenant farmers. And they paid landowner with what they raised on the land, whether it was crops or cattle, and that was called their share, hence sharecropping. And oftentimes the landowner was the person that was formerly their master under the system of slavery. Very unreliable source of income because you're depending on farming. So a lot of these freedmen farmers went into debt and so owed money to those landowners. This also kept them at the bottom of the social ladder because they were constantly in debt, didn't know what it was to own, or didn't have the opportunity to own things. This is the end of part 1.